All right, welcome everyone to Wise Up, a money podcast made for and by Gens Y and Z to help you be better with everything relating to money, whether that's investing, financial literacy. And I really wanted to start this show so that we could have a better understanding of how we can help you be better with money. And the way to do that, the best way that I know how, is to bring on people more educated than I am, see what resources we have together to help you in your life. So I'm very proud, with this pilot, to start the show off with Professor Joe Fitter, the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. How you doing today, Professor Joe?
Great. Thank you so much, Gabe, for having me, and great to be on. Welcome, everyone.
All right. So, and for those who don't know who you are, what you do, can you give us a little background into your experience academically, professionally? What do you do, and what are you known for?
Absolutely, Gabe. So first of all, I'm a second career professor. I didn't spend the first part of my career writing textbooks or doing research. I found that calling later in life. I spent the first 25 years of my career in the semiconductor industry, in high tech, as a finance professional, basically a finance person, finance manager, CFO, all the way up, and spent my time globally. So living in lots of different places all around the world, mostly the Far East. But also spent some time in Europe and, of course, here in America. And I guess in about 2015, decided it was time to try something new and different, and so decided to come back to my alma mater, Kelley School of Business, and begin teaching. And so I'm now a finance professor at Kelley. I teach both undergraduate and MBA students, mostly in the field of finance, although I do have a few other courses that I teach. One course specifically on China, where I spent almost a decade living and working in my professional career. And so I take really a pragmatic approach to my career. I'm kind of a finance geek, you might say. I studied finance. I worked in the field of finance. And I love finance. I love the markets, the financial markets. I always had a mindset of not wanting to spend my entire career working. I wanted to find a way to get a quick off-ramp to be able to go and enjoy life, because time is so short and valuable. And so it's something that I approached. I was part of the FIRE movement. Some of you maybe have heard of that, the Financial Independence Retire Early. Before it was even a thing, I was interested in the FIRE movement in the 1990s, if you could imagine. So 25, 30 years ago, there were some of us who were talking about, how do we not work until we're age 65? Is there some way we can do this better? So anyway, that's a long story. That's about me. I'm very practical and pragmatic. I follow the financial markets. I do research on the financial markets, but predominantly I invest in the financial markets. And so I suppose the scars that I have are battle scars from real-world experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing background. I mean, you've covered a lot of the main points that people today want to talk about. The FIRE movement today is, I remember I first started hearing about FIRE back in 2014, 2015, when I was still in high school. And it was still largely foreign to me, the concept of not working till 65, and actually being able to do it earlier. And then in the years since, really when COVID hit, that was the first time I had ever heard of digital nomads, people who were working remotely. Every CNBC article in like 2020, 2021 was about some American expat working on the beaches of Mazatlan somewhere. And the globalization of working, of finance, of being able to be your own boss per se, has really piqued the interest of most people my age. The Gen Zs, millennials, who don't want to work like their parents did, into their 60s, or even now, with financial conditions as they are. There are plenty of people who are delaying retirement, or who are coming out of retirement, re-entering the workforce because of the downturns in their pensions, their retirement funds, whatever it might have been. So I'm sure that we'll be able to touch all of that throughout the course of this conversation. But I really want to delve more into your background before you started teaching, your professional background. You said that you spent a decade, in China. So what was that like?
Well, I became an international person, if you will, when I was an undergrad. As an undergrad, I had a real interest in studying and living abroad. I didn't know what the wild world was all about. I was from the Midwest, sleepy little town, even a big city in the Midwest, it's kind of boring. And so I wanted to spread my wings, and I found myself as an undergraduate student living at that time in Eastern Europe, before the Berlin Wall came down. And I was over there living in an Eastern European country, sort of on the other side of the Iron Curtain. and thinking, wow, what's going to happen? And as that all transpired, as an aspiring business student, that's pretty exciting. Seeing whole societies shift from socialism to capitalism almost overnight. And so that really captivated my interest in knowing that the world was a bigger place. And so China was actually probably the fourth or fifth stop on my international journey. I had lived previously in Europe and Japan and Taiwan and the Philippines. And so China was sort of a capstone, a culmination. I came to China in the mid-2000s, and the economy, of course, booming and changing and developing very rapidly. Personal experience was fantastic because there's just so many differences culturally, and the food and the environment, the business environment, the pace of the environment, the ethical dilemmas that you sometimes face. To me, it was a challenge in living every moment of life, let alone having a career and doing business. So it was a 24/7, 365 challenge. And that I just love those kind of situations. I was on all the time. The downside to that is you can burn out. And I think that's what happened to me. After so many years of doing that, I was 45 and I was ready to retire. And I test drove retirement for about 6 months. And I got terribly bored. And I realized that there was something wrong with the FIRE movement, because FIRE talks about getting there, getting to the finish line to be able to end your career and financially be okay. But it doesn't talk about what the hell you're going to do with all the time you've got left on your hands. And hopefully we have lots and lots and lots of time, decades. And so I was 45 and out of a tech career, and not quite sure where I wanted to go. So what do you do when you don't know what you want to do? You go and you study. And so I started some online classes because that was all something new and different, and did some online classes and got really interested. And the next thing you know, I found myself teaching in a classroom. And so, back to the China story, there's a lot of value in learning about other cultures. And certainly, I think any MBA student, any student who goes and gets an advanced business degree needs to understand the largest economies in the world. It's wonderful if you could go and you can consult with small businesses in a small economy, let's say, Guatemala or something like that. But the real earth-changing situations, scenarios are going to happen in places like Europe, Japan, China, United States, the four largest eco zones, if you will. And so when I came back to teach at Kelley, one of the things that I did was make sure that we developed a China program where students could come with me back to China for a few weeks or a month and really, learn something about how business works there. And I'm grateful because my students actually encouraged me, because they said, go do this. And I said, okay, let's do it. And then, of course, they joined. So that worked out real well. Anyway, long answer to your question of why China and what that was like. But that's a little bit more about me and my perspective that I bring to the table.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting perspective that you can bring, because most people, we really only hear about China in the news. And it's usually not in the economic sense. It's usually, different socio-political issues that we're facing. At best, most people hear about China because of, the trade war. And most of the time, we don't really hear about them, in terms of their economy. And it's very rare to have someone who not only has been there, who goes there periodically, but also has the ability to take students there and to learn about the very globalized nature of markets. Looking back, I was far too young to possibly remember this, but the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which led into the 1998 Russian default on their debt, and how that triggered really a couple of years worth of financial crises globally. Argentina started defaulting on their debt, and then 2000, America's market crashed. And you're really trying to understand the globalized nature of markets, of economics, and trying to be a student in that sense of the word. And I think that's an interesting point that you brought up with touring other countries, taking students there, because this was, I believe, a month or two now. Russia defaulted on their most recent debt payments, and I very quickly got back online and tried reading different analysis of it, and I was like, don't worry, it's not like what happened in 1998. And I was like, I don't believe you for some very strange reason. countries defaulting on their debts. I think Ukraine now is trying to get a payment to delay their debt payments. China, I think, also today cut their interest rates. That was breaking news earlier today. They cut their interest rates because of the slowdown in their markets. So it's really fascinating to see how globalized markets have become and how what's happening in China, in Russia, and Ukraine might be impacting our markets and how we have to adjust to what they're doing. And, it's fascinating in that sense of the word. And having that exposure is really useful for people. So, this will tie into, I guess, a question I wanted to ask you now, teaching. What do you tell, your students? Because now your younger students, if you're teaching undergraduates, are younger Gen Zs. They're 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds who do not remember the '08 financial crisis. They were at best 4 years old. So they have no real memories of it. Even I don't have the fondest memories of it. I was 8 or 9 years old. I can't really say much about it. So for most people who are in school now, even most adults, millennials now who are 35, 36, were still in college when the last financial crisis hit. So this really will be the first recession, if we get there, the first major financial crisis that a good portion of working adults, of college students, ever experience. So now that you're kind of in the thick of it, in academia, how are you walking them through it?
It's an interesting question because when I worked in China, I was amongst a society that had seen nothing but economic growth for 20 or 30 years, 35 years. And it was around 2008 that the economy slowed down in China. Of course, in the U.S., it was decimated with the global financial crisis. In China, the economy certainly slowed. They had been chalking up double-digit growth for year after year after year. And to fall to under double-digit growth was a huge trauma for many of them. And the advice probably is the same advice that I would give here, and that is have a good defense. That's your best offense. Your best offense is a good defense. Have the war chest built up. If job loss occurs, and it often does occur with recession, be ready to pivot. Have that resume dusted off and ready. Have 3 to 6 months of emergency money. So if you do lose your job, you're able to find another job. And by the way, when you're 21, it's easy to find a new job. When you're 31, it's that much harder because you're more senior. There's fewer positions. The world is like a pyramid. The higher up you go in an organization, the fewer roles there are. And so it may take longer for you to find employment. I think the best, being conservative, having a good, what I'll say, defense around know your skills, continue to develop your skills, be marketable, make sure your network is aware of what you're doing and what your capabilities are so you can lean on your network. And if job loss were to occur, don't be afraid to move, to relocate. I used to joke all the time. People would say, well, my job is going away. What can we do about that? And my response was always the same, and that is, well, go where your job goes. Be mobile, be able to move around. So I think that can be very important as well.
I mean, I think that's definitely a consideration that's exploded given COVID. The work from home options, the hybrid options, where now people are really taking into account the magnitude of which their family matters to them, that personal life balance between work and what they actually enjoy doing. Hopefully they also enjoy their work, but if they're not having that balance between what they do. So for most people, it was, I can imagine before hybrid working was truly an option, the concept of picking up and moving was daunting, especially if you had a spouse, if you had children, because then they also have to restart. They need to find new schools, they need to make new friends, and it's a challenge for everyone. Being able to work remotely eases that burden, because if your job is not tied directly to an office, you can live wherever you'd like, work wherever you want, but that still doesn't eliminate that risk of losing that job. Because then, let's say you've picked, I don't know, a couple popular cities to live in since the pandemic exploded have been, Norman, Denver, Nashville, Tennessee. And let's say you're there, you're working remotely, you're in your early 30s. Now what? So you've got there. And I think that's what a lot of people are now struggling with potential layoffs looming. Ford a couple of weeks ago cutting 8,000 jobs, layoffs starting to happen in some sectors and industries. That is still a very daunting question of, well, what happens? Because sure, we can move, but if we have family here, we have roots here, part of the community, that can still be terrifying. So, I really wanted to know what your thoughts would be on that.